Hi, this is Coach Dan Williams with Character Advantage, and I'm going to talk to you today about the performance myth. Yes, you heard me right. There is a myth when it comes to performance. I discovered this myth when players would come to me and ask for personal training. And as I'd begin to train them, I'd ask them about what they were experiencing right then, and they would begin to share with me how they felt like they were falling behind. And as I began to talk to the player about their future, their desires, and their destiny, I also asked them about their origin, like how did they get started in their sport? And they would tell me their stories. As they were telling me these stories, I began to realize that there was a gap between where they wanted to be and where they were. And how big that gap was determined how well they felt about themselves in that moment. If the gap was large, they were really feeling anxiety. If the gap was small, they felt fairly confident that they could catch up with everyone else and they could take their game to the next level. There's a myth when it comes to performance because we always think that there's this steady ascent that we're on our performance journey. We're not always ascending. Sometimes we're descending. Sometimes we don't make the teams that we want to make. Sometimes we're falling behind those that we're competing against. Sport is unpredictable, and we are going to be in moments where we're descending. It's what we do in those moments that either makes or breaks us. And so I began to realize that there was a performance myth, but with that myth, there was also a performance advantage. And the performance advantage was the gap between where I felt like my player should be and where my player was. And that gap was an opportunity to develop their skill, their mental toughness, and also their heart. But the reality is that if we want to take our games to the next level, if we want to advance and see success and experience success, then we have to work on our attitudes, which are our expressions of the values that we have. Now, one of the things that I learned as I was coaching and guiding players and athletes into the attitudes that we had identified as the attitudes that would take them to the next level was I began to see their stance and their posture towards those attitudes begin to change. Now, stance is an idea we understand in sport. Every sport has particular stance that the coach will teach as a fundamental. Maybe it's a defensive stance, maybe it's an offensive stance, maybe it's a ready position that they need to be in at the beginning of a play. Whatever it is, there's a certain stance that we tend to talk about in the context of sport. And it's centered around this idea that we need to be in a balanced position, ready for anything that comes our way. And that is what we're helping our athletes begin to embody in the context of their heart. Their heart begins to take that stance of being ready for anything. And so as I began to work on their attitude, I began to see a shift and a change in the athletes. They begin to regain their balance. Their confidence began to grow. They began to take on more ownership. And even when they were falling behind, or even when they were going through a period of time when they were descending, they didn't lose their balance. They stayed on balance because they knew it was part of the journey that they were on, the journey that they were going through, all of the challenges that they knew that they would be facing. And that's what I began to realize was the character advantage, because they could keep their balance when things didn't go their way. Now, hopefully this has been helpful for you today, because I want you to understand and to develop your character so it will become your advantage.